John had grown used to silence in his home, the kind of silence that comes after years of routine and disappointment. He was 38, a single father doing his best to raise his son while juggling 2 jobs. His marriage had ended in betrayal, leaving behind a bitterness he rarely spoke of, but it shadowed his every choice. The extra room in his small house had stayed locked since his ex-wife left, but mounting bills forced him to unlock it and post an ad. He told himself it was practical, nothing more, a stranger in the house to help pay rent. He didn't expect the arrival of Emily to shift the rhythm of his carefully managed life. She appeared one crisp afternoon, suitcase in hand, her expression caught between nervousness and quiet confidence. She introduced herself as a college student searching for affordable housing. There was something about the way she carried herself, polite, deliberate, yet unassuming, that disarmed him. She wore simple clothes, nothing extravagant, though her speech carried a polish he couldn't quite place. John assumed she was like many students he saw around town, trying to make ends meet. He never questioned the small details that suggested otherwise, the fine leather strap of her bag, the quality of her shoes, the way she hesitated before mentioning her family. John's son, eager for company, warmed to her instantly. Emily knelt to his level, asked about his favorite subjects, and within minutes was helping him with a math problem he had been struggling with. John stood in the doorway watching them, surprised by how naturally she fit into the quiet corners of their home. For the first time in months, laughter bounced off the walls. He caught himself smiling and quickly looked away, reminding himself she was just a tenant, nothing more. In the days that followed, Emily settled in without effort. She was respectful of the space, careful not to intrude, but somehow her presence filled the emptiness John hadn't wanted to acknowledge. She cooked for herself but often made enough to share, and more than once John and his son found themselves sitting at the table eating meals that felt more like family dinners than anything they had known in years. He felt a warmth growing that had little to do with food. He noticed the subtle brightness Emily brought to the house, how her laughter eased the heaviness in his chest, though he told himself it was nothing unusual. Still, there were moments that made him pause. He once saw her hurriedly end a phone call when he walked into the room, her tone hushed, her posture tense. Another time, he noticed a small piece of jewelry on her desk, simple in design but too fine to belong to an ordinary student. She always dismissed his casual questions with a smile that didn't fully reach her eyes. John, respectful of boundaries, didn't push further. He assumed she had her own struggles, her own secrets, and reminded himself that he had no right to pry. But late at night, when the house was quiet and he sat at the kitchen table going over unpaid bills, his thoughts drifted. He thought of the way Emily's voice softened when she spoke to his son, the way her presence seemed to chase away shadows he had learned to live with. He felt something stirring inside him, something dangerous he pushed away. She was young, she was a tenant, and he was a man who had already lost too much to risk again. Yet the silence in the house no longer felt so empty, and that frightened him more than loneliness ever had. Word count, 573. Do you want me to continue with section 2, minimum 570 words, in the same style right away? Even with his efforts to keep things measured, John found himself pulled toward Emily in ways he couldn't easily explain. It began with small gestures, her habit of leaving a plate for him on nights he came home late, the way she checked on his son's homework when he was too tired to sit at the table. She slipped into their lives without force, and before long, the house felt different. John hadn't realized how much weight he carried until he caught himself laughing at one of her stories, the sound startling him as though it belonged to someone else. Emily was careful too, or at least she tried to be. She reminded herself constantly that she was only there to finish her studies in peace, to live simply away from the expectations of her wealthy family. Her father's control and her mother's endless social obligations had left her suffocated. In John's small, imperfect home, she felt freedom she hadn't known existed. The simplicity of shared dinners, the way the boy leaned against her shoulder while reading, even John's tired smile when he returned from work, these were things money had never bought her. She cherished them more than she could admit. As days passed, John noticed more. He noticed how her hair caught the light when she leaned over the stove, how her laughter filled the air with warmth he had forgotten existed. He told himself it was nothing but appreciation, a landlord grateful for a considerate tenant, yet late at night, he found himself remembering the smallest details. He scolded himself, insisting she was far too young, reminding himself that boundaries existed for a reason. Still, each morning, when Emily greeted him with a quiet smile, the reminders dissolved. One evening, after helping his son finish homework, Emily stayed back in the kitchen with John. They spoke casually at first, but the conversation slipped into deeper territory. She confessed how difficult it was to feel at home among people her age, how loneliness often settled heavy on her shoulders. John, in turn, told her of his failed marriage, the betrayal that had left him doubtful of love, the nights when bitterness was the only companion. The air grew heavy between them, their voices soft, their eyes meeting too often and lingering too long. Neither moved closer, yet the distance between them felt fragile. The pull intensified when John returned home one rainy night to find Emily sitting by the window, her eyes red from tears. She had argued with her father again, though she gave no details. John sat beside her, uncertain, but when she leaned against his shoulder, he didn't move. They sat in silence, her breathing uneven, his hand resting awkwardly at first on hers, then tightening as though it belonged there. For a moment, the world narrowed to that fragile connection. When she lifted her face toward him, the air trembled with possibility, but John drew back suddenly, guilt rushing in. He muttered something about the late hour, excused himself, and left her sitting in the dim light, her heart pounding. In the days that followed, they pretended nothing had happened, yet both felt the change. Emily found excuses to linger in the kitchen when he was around. John avoided her eyes but noticed every detail, every laugh, every brush of her sleeve when they passed too close. His ex-wife's occasional phone calls only deepened the contrast, her sharp words reminded him of all he had lost, while Emily's kindness showed him what he missed. He tried to remind himself of responsibility, of the risks, but temptation was no longer distant. It had moved into his home, breathed his air, and waited patiently for the moment when resistance would finally break. Word count, 578. Want me to move ahead with section 3, minimum 570 words, where the forbidden line is crossed. The night it finally happened felt inevitable, though both had resisted it for weeks. John came home late, his son already asleep, the house quiet except for the faint sound of music playing from the kitchen. Emily was there, sitting at the table with 2 glasses of wine. She smiled softly, almost apologetically, and gestured for him to sit. He hesitated, aware of the danger, but the exhaustion of the day and the comfort of her presence broke through his restraint. He sat, and for a while, they spoke about ordinary things, college assignments, the boys' progress in school, even the weather. Yet beneath their words pulsed something unspoken, heavier than the silence that followed. As the wine lowered their defenses, the conversation deepened. John admitted how often he felt like he was failing, how the weight of responsibility sometimes left him unable to breathe. Emily listened intently, her hand resting on the table near his. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, trembling. She confessed how much she hated the world she came from, the wealth, the expectations, the lack of sincerity. In his home, she said, she felt more real, more alive than she ever had before. Her eyes glistened, and John, in spite of every warning voice in his head, reached out and covered her hand with his. The moment stretched, too intimate to deny. Their eyes met, and before he could stop himself, John leaned closer. Emily didn't pull away. Their lips met briefly, a soft, questioning kiss that burned with everything they had tried to suppress. He pulled back, murmuring that it was wrong, but Emily's hand cupped his cheek, pulling him toward her again. This time the kiss was certain, lingering, the kind that carried every ounce of the longing they had bottled up. The sound of rain against the windows blurred the world beyond them. When they finally parted, both sat frozen, shaken by the weight of what they had just done. What followed over the next days was a series of stolen moments, each one more reckless than the last. Emily brushed against him in the kitchen and let her hand linger. John slipped into her room at night under the guise of checking on noise, only to remain until morning. Their passion was fierce, fueled by secrecy and the thrill of crossing a forbidden line. They tried to be discreet, doors closing quietly, footsteps muffled, but the guilt never left. John knew he was betraying his role as a father and protector, and yet he couldn't stop. Each kiss, each touch reminded him of the man he once was before bitterness hollowed him out. Emily, too, was caught in the storm, terrified of losing the one place she felt safe, yet unable to deny her feelings. The weight of their choices pressed harder as the outside world crept closer. Neighbors began to notice the unusual closeness between them. Whispers floated about how often John and Emily were seen together, how her presence seemed more like family than that of a tenant. John's son, innocent but perceptive, began to ask questions: why Emily spent so much time with them, why she smiled at John in a way that wasn't quite the same as before. John brushed off the questions, but each one cut deeper, a reminder of the line he had crossed. At night, when Emily slipped into his bed, the guilt seemed to fade, replaced by fire and tenderness. Yet in the quiet moments afterward, as she lay against him, John stared into the darkness, aware that every secret had its price. He knew it was only a matter of time before the fragile world they had built would shatter under the weight of truth. Still, when she touched his face and whispered that she felt alive with him, he chose silence over reason. Desire had already claimed him, and the cost no longer felt distant, it felt inevitable. John discovered the truth by accident. He had been gathering laundry when a folded document slipped from Emily's bag on the floor. At first, he meant only to return it, but her last name caught his eye. Recognition struck like a blow. He had seen it in headlines, attached to companies and properties worth fortunes. His heart raced as he pieced it together: the mysterious phone calls, the polished speech, the jewelry too fine for an ordinary student. Emily wasn't just another tenant struggling through college. She was the daughter of one of the wealthiest men in the city, living under his roof as if she belonged to a different world. When he confronted her that evening, his voice was sharp, his hands trembling. Emily's face drained of color, then flushed with shame. She admitted everything: the wealth, the father she fought with, the desperate desire to be seen as a person rather than an extension of money. She swore she hadn't meant to deceive him, that she only wanted a place where love and kindness weren't bought. Tears spilled as she begged him to believe that what she felt for him was real, not some rebellion or game. John felt torn in two. The betrayal of his ex-wife returned to him in waves, but this was different. Emily hadn't betrayed him in the same way. She had hidden herself, but out of fear, not malice. Still, the weight of it all crushed him. He thought of the whispers, the neighbors watching, his son asking questions too innocent for answers. And deeper than all of that was the knowledge that he had broken his own code. He had allowed desire to cloud judgment, stepping into an affair that could unravel everything he had fought to hold together. The storm worsened when his ex-wife found out. She had heard whispers and came armed with accusations, threatening to use his inappropriate relationship as leverage in a custody battle. John felt the ground shift beneath him, his mistakes closing in. What had begun as comfort and connection now loomed as scandal and risk, not only to his reputation but to his role as a father. For the first time, he wondered if Emily's presence, once a balm to his loneliness, was now a danger to the life he had built for his son. Emily, seeing the damage, offered to leave. Her voice shook as she told him she loved him but didn't want to ruin his life. She said she would walk away if it meant protecting his son, his stability, his peace. John's heart clenched at her words. He loved her more deeply than he had thought possible, but he also knew their love was born in secrecy, nourished by loneliness, and shadowed by guilt. It was a love that could not survive the light. That night, they came together once more, their passion tangled with grief, every kiss an unspoken goodbye. When dawn broke, Emily packed her things quietly. John didn't stop her. He stood in the doorway with his son, watching her walk down the path, suitcase in hand, her figure small against the rising sun. She turned once, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of sorrow and tenderness, and then she was gone. The house felt emptier than ever, yet filled with memories he knew he would carry forever. Life moved forward, but nothing was the same. John returned to his routines, raising his son, working his jobs, yet inside he was changed. The guilt lingered, but so did something else, a reminder that beneath the bitterness and loss, he was still capable of love, of passion, of feeling alive. He understood now that not every love was meant to last. Some existed only to remind you of who you are, to awaken parts of you thought lost. Emily had been that for him. And though she was gone, her presence lingered like the faint echo of a song, both beautiful and bittersweet, destined never to fade.